Do you think we can start? Okay. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Federica Di Sario. I'm a journalist at Politico Europe, so I'm based in Brussels normally. And I'm very happy to be here at 9 in the morning after a great night yesterday. And so congratulations to all of you for showing up this morning. I must admit that writing about climate change all the time can really get you a bit down. And so that's why it's so important to reflect on the things that actually go well and the things that actually developed at a time in which climate action is so slow and can feel also inadequate to live up to the challenge that we are facing. And so one of the things that have developed the most in the past years is definitely carbon markets and cap and trade schemes. And I mean, I don't need to convince you all that those are incredibly powerful tools to reduce emissions in an efficient way. And so, as I said, it's important to take stock of the developments. We were just discussing before how rapidly they develop and how difficult it is to keep track of that. And that's why it's very useful to have a tool such as the report that was prepared by ICAP. I'm sorry, I need to read this. The International Carbon Action Partnership Emission Trading Worldwide report, which is a 6-month effort to really put together all the latest trends and the latest not just cap and trade schemes, but also carbon taxes, so that you have this full picture of what's happening in the market. We will start just hearing the remarks. We will listen to the key messages of the report, which will be distilled by Lou Stevens, who's the senior carbon market expert at ICAP. And after that, we will proceed with our panel, which is an incredible mix of national experts, but also policymakers that came here to tell us about their own schemes back home and to understand it better how they work also towards the ETS. So please, Luis, I think the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Federica. And welcome, everybody. And I'd echo those the sentiments about the early morning. Thanks, everybody, for being here after the big party. Really appreciate it. So hopefully we can give you an interesting session to make it worth your while. So yeah, I'm very pleased to be here to talk about our annual status report. It was launched last week, so it's kind of hot off the press and very timely for us to have a chance to talk through. I'll begin with a quick rundown of our organisation. I'm sure many of you won't be familiar with ICAP, so it's a good place to start. And then from there, I'll get into the guts of the presentation. So obviously, climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and governments are going to need all the tools at their disposal if we're going to stay within the limits set out in the Paris Agreement. Carbon pricing is a central pillar of that policy response, but it's complicated and it's difficult. So that's where ICAP comes in. ICAP is a forum of... Oh, it's not moving on there. Can you make the slides move? Oh, here we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. So ICAP is a forum of 42 national and subnational governments, which facilitates cooperation between the jurisdictions on the development and implementation of emission trading schemes. We do that through knowledge sharing, including through the report that we've just published, capacity building, like trainings in particular regions around the world, and through technical dialogues where jurisdictions can share their knowledge and learnings. So coming to the status report that we're talking about today, this is really our flagship publication. It seeks to bring together in one place all the information on emissions trading schemes around the world, and I really do mean around the world. This is the scope is really large. It talks about schemes that are in operation, schemes that are under development, such as those in Brazil and Turkey, which we'll hear about later from Hussein, and schemes that are under consideration. We know from policymakers that it's a really valuable resource in understanding how schemes are developing around the world and in providing examples about how other countries are doing it when they need to provide similar advice to their own decision makers. It's grown over the years. The first edition in 2014 was about 70 pages and covered about 32 schemes. This current edition covers 61 schemes and it's now 250 pages. So normally I'm not a fan of reports growing like that, but I think in this case it's justified because of the wealth of useful information that it presents. So part of the reason for the report growing a little this year is the inclusion of more intensity-based trading schemes. In the past, the report's really focused on cap and trade schemes, but given that more intensity-based schemes are coming into force, we've expanded out this year. So this infographic really talks to the ecosystem of direct carbon pricing and policy. And we really live up in the emission trading system area, the blue part of the rainbow, and we're talking about the absolute cap systems and the intensity-based cap systems. And you can see those sit alongside carbon taxes, voluntary markets, and offsetting schemes, but those are outside the scope of our report. So coming to the key highlights from this year, I suppose the 4 key messages are the following. First, we've got more and more governments worldwide adopting ETSs. We're seeing this in emerging economies. For example, Indonesia has taken a significant step forward and by recently launching an ETS focused on the power generation sector. And countries like India and Brazil are also making important progress in developing their frameworks. Developed countries are also making strides. For example, Canada and the European Union are in planning stages of launching new systems at the moment. Second, we're seeing the emergence of new and innovative designs in these schemes. And we're seeing more variation across the design choices that are being made, including, like I said earlier, more intensity-based schemes and even some hybrid schemes which operate on a cap and a relative cap basis. Third, we're seeing that ETSs are being refined, expanding and aligning with net zero targets. Examples here include California, Quebec, and the UK. Eric will give us some more details in the UK later. And South Korea, where efforts are underway to expand their ETS framework. And finally, we've seen another year of record revenues from ETS schemes. On the one hand, this is down to consistently high price levels across a number of schemes. And on the other hand, it's also down to the increasing adoption of auctioning as an allocation method for units. And so that means there's a revenue there that is developed for the jurisdiction. This slide really gets into the key numbers that we are seeing from the report. Starting with coverage, there are currently 36 jurisdictions around the world with emission trading schemes operational, covering 9.9 gigatons of CO2 emissions. And this makes up over 18% of global emissions. Moving on to revenue, in 2023, these systems generated $74 billion USD. And this accounts for almost a quarter of all the revenues generated since 2007, totaling $303 billion USD. Coming to current development progress, there are 14 ETSs in various stages of development, with an additional 8 under consideration. And finally, nearly 1/3 of the world's population lives in regions covered by an ETS, and jurisdictions representing 58% of global GDP are actively engaged in emission trading initiatives. So I'll bring you here to our map, which unfortunately is a little washed out. Normally it's the complete world, but it looks like we're missing a few regions there. It's not deliberate. We'll put that down to the projector or something. I promise those countries are still there. Some of you may be familiar with this map. It's probably the most used tool on our website. We have 3 categories here. The blue represents schemes in force. The darker green represents schemes which are under development. So there you can see countries like Brazil and India are some of the real highlights there. And the lighter green is under consideration. And that really means there's been no decision to proceed with developing a scheme yet, but they're actively working on it. So we'll get some particular highlights when the time comes from Eric and Hussein and Katie. And there's a lot there, so I'd encourage you to get on the website if you're interested in getting more detail.
No wonder I'm so tired.
Coming now to the global expansion of ETS, things really got started in 2005 with the EU ETS, covering about 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Over time, we've had schemes being added to that mix. The tiny words that you won't be able to read above each of those bars represents schemes being added year on year. And you can see there's a major step up in 2021 when the China National Scheme comes on. And one of the kind of phenomena that we can see in this plot is that over the last 4 years, the coverage has been relatively stable at around about 18% of global emissions. And that's despite more and more schemes coming online. And that's really down to these kind of competing effects of ETSs with reducing caps on the one hand, pushing that proportion down, and the additional schemes on the other hand, pushing it up. And you can see it most obviously here in that dark blue at the bottom of the plot, which represents the European Union slowly stepping down. And looking to the future, I think the signs are there that this plot will continue to grow, and we'll continue to see more and more schemes added to it year on year. We've already talked about Brazil and Turkey, but also Ukraine, India, Japan, and a number of states in the US are on that list. So coming to sectoral coverage, this plot gets into which sectors are covered by each scheme. The donut in the middle, or two blue donuts in the middle, represent energy and industry. So obviously those are the most common sectors for schemes to cover. Moving out from there, transport and buildings are covered by about a third of schemes around the world. And from there, there's much more variation in the design choices that are taken by countries and how they run their schemes. And still absent from this plot is biogenic emissions from agriculture. There are still no schemes which cover that sector. Coming then to allowance prices. In the top left here, you can see a plot which presents the prices in various schemes in USD over 2023. You can see it's pretty tricky to kind of pull a unifying theme out of that plot. I think if we were being really brave, maybe we'd say it's kind of broadly stable, but there's certainly a lot of variation in there. And if we take a couple of examples, both the EU and the UK ETSs hit highs around February 2023, and then have softened over the rest of the year. Whereas if you look at some of the US states, they've seen steady gains over the course of the year. Those are some of the straighter lines towards the bottom of the plot there. So for those schemes that utilize auctioning, those prices convert into revenues. And this plot really digs into that. Last year we saw the highest annual revenue collected by ETSs around the world, just over 74 billion USD, up from 63 billion USD in 2022. This has been driven by a combination of relatively high prices in several systems, and like I said before, the increasing use of auctioning as an allocation method. And this follows a strong upward trend we've seen since 2020. You can really see the big steps up in the bar graph there. And in the pie on the left, we can see where those revenues are coming from. And Europe really represents the lion's share here. The dark blue is the European Union. The brighter purple is Germany, and the darker purple there is the UK. And together they make up around about 3/4 of total global revenue. So of course, with so much money being brought in by these schemes, the next question really is how is it being used? And we've really looked to dig into this question this year and start to understand across jurisdictions how and if they're earmarking the money that comes from these ETSs towards particular uses. So this kind of stylized Venn diagram, I'd say, is attempting to show that. So things are clustered around these 5 themes. We've got general budget up the top there, so that gives governments maximum flexibility in what they do with the funding. Climate mitigation is the next as we move around clockwise. Low carbon innovation in the orange. There's sort of a basket of other initiatives in the pink, which includes things like education and health. And then in the blue, with Austria by itself there, is the assistance for individuals and households and businesses. That's through things like climate grants, which many governments are looking at. So looking at this plot, you can see there's a big cluster around the general budget, the general budget peanut up the top there. And in there we can see New Zealand, the UK, Switzerland, and many of the Chinese subnational schemes. Following the general budget is the next largest one is probably the climate mitigation bubble. We see a lot of schemes in there, and then the low carbon innovation bubble there. And I think looking forward, we're likely to see more and more earmarking of funding coming in, particularly as schemes grapple with short-term acceptance issues, and it's important that they can be clear about where the money that is being paid into the schemes is going. So I'll also use this opportunity to quickly plug some of the other ICAP tools and reports that we do. This is all available on our website. We've obviously got the map that I talked about earlier. All the infographics that are in our status report are available. We do regular news updates for some kind of substantive changes in schemes around the world. And we also have technical briefs to help with policymakers in developing schemes. So I'll leave it there and hopefully leave some good time for our panelists to give their input. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luis. It was very, very interesting, and especially for me as a journalist, I was just thinking about a lot of story that I could, in which I could use this data. So I think it's definitely an incredible resource for a lot of people here. So allow me to introduce you the panelists we have today to discuss further the developments of the emissions trading schemes across the globe. I would like to start with Katie Sullivan. She's the Managing Director of ICAP. We also have Eric Heskett. He's in charge of the international engagement for the UK emissions trading scheme. And also we are very lucky to have Hüseyin Ayaz, who work for the climate change. So he's the climate change expert at the Directorate of Climate Change in Turkey. So welcome, everybody. I would like to start maybe with Katie, because I think compared to the other panelists that we have, you can give us more a broader view of the market. Obviously, you're mostly focused about the US, but because we don't have a European counterpart, I will kindly ask you to step in also for, to give us your perspective on the European developments as well. But we were talking before, and you mentioned the fact that this is an incredibly interesting year because of the politics that we see. I mean, we have elections in over 60 countries, and global pricing, and carbon markets are artificial markets that are linked to policies and political will. So how do you think that this year and the different trends that we observe will impact the future of carbon markets? Like, what's your view on this? What trends should we observe? Thank you.
Thanks, Francesca. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the summit. Apologies on behalf of IETA for those who went to the nightcap last night, and troopers for showing up this morning. And I want to give really heartfelt appreciation to ICAP, Luis and the team for developing this incredible compendium. Every year for IETA, this document, this beast of a document now, and I would say along with the World Bank State and Trends Report, which comes out probably a month or two from now, It is IETA's absolute gospel when it comes to our own intelligence with respect to the latest on emissions trading globally, but also a massively important tool for the outreach that we do and the education that we do as IETA straddles across many borders and encounters similar or new faces, be that civil society, other business groups, regulators, and legislators. I'm really appreciative this year that ICAP has chosen to go beyond only cap and trade in this report, and I want to underscore that this is the first time it has gone beyond just cap and trade to these other shades of emissions trading systems. I am Canada-based, and a lot of my time and energy goes into our activities across the Americas, plural, so across North America into Latin America. And for a very, very long time, you've had these other quite powerful and impactful emissions trading systems that are not cap and trade, but they do put a price on carbon. There are trading mechanisms involved, and there's a lot of private capital investment and plans and hedging that are occurring in these markets, and a lot of learnings from these markets. And so I just want to hats off, cap off to ICAP, no pun intended, for adding that to the compendium this year. And also just, I mean, I'm looking at, do you mind going to the map? Do you have the flicker?
I don't, but we can flip back, yeah.
That would be helpful. I think just for everyone, but also the other tools that we use on a regular basis. So it is the ETS briefs, and that is, you know, a big chunk of this new ICAP report is the detailed snapshots for all of these emissions trading systems around the world, the design elements, market oversight, cost containment, different thresholds, different prices. I mean, it is gold for us, and also the infographics. So I just want to make it very clear how important it is to IETA and certainly our membership, but also the broader stakeholders that we touch on across all of these markets. And I look at these markets and I think, or this map, and I always think, oh my gosh, no wonder I'm so tired. Because, and it's not just me, it's also our staff, which is 50 plus, I guess, now. And even in the last year, IETA has had to accommodate just this very quickly evolving landscape. We've opened offices in Colombia, South Africa, Singapore, Japan, India. I might be missing a couple there. That's even just within the last year, and to accommodate the activity. And be that conduit of information around some of the best practices and what is occurring across these markets, to pick the best bits for others that are under development or being modified to adopt or adapt to their own systems. So unfortunately, Daniele, as Francesca said, Daniele from Enel couldn't make it to the event today due to a tragedy that occurred at an Enel plant sometime last week. But he does sit on IETA's global board, and that board represents a swath of the cross-section of businesses we do represent. Given that you've been at an IETA summit for the last 2 days, I think you appreciate that we represent over, I think it's 320 companies, right, around the world, and across different sectors. It's assurance, it's project developers of all stripes, it's emitters of all stripes, steel, cement, chemicals, power, oil and gas, you name it. It is the bankers, the brokers, financials. And they are operating, investing, have workforces across all of these markets. And I'm not being dramatic, all of these markets. So one of the biggest, takeaways here is the fragmentation. It is real. I think we see more improvements with thanks to actually groups like ICAP, right? That it is, at least there's more learnings and best practice that are occurring across these sectors. It's interesting to see the EU ETS, Phase 1, 2005, and how WCI, Quebec, California, learn from the EU ETS experience, the good and the bad, as they designed and launched their markets 11 years ago now. They linked 10 years ago now, California, Quebec, WCI. And now experiences from WCI, which cover broadly including transport, right? They include compliance offsets. There are other differences that the EU ETS, I would argue, is learning from the WCI experience, right? And then the experiences from these, say, more mature programs globally, where these other emerging markets are learning from those. So I guess to look just at the Americas map and what's keeping us extremely busy, even in just 2003, I think IETA's working groups, and we have our California, US states level working group, which has about 600-700 individuals on just that working group. We have the Canadian working group that has another 600-700 individuals, US federal working group, and then our Latin America working groups. I think we had over 50, 60 official submissions to draft regulations or proposed legislation across all the Americas last year. It was super, super busy, and this is also a very busy year for us. So in California, what we're waiting for is the official launch of the California and Quebec rulemaking for their cap-and-trade systems, and this is about how the cap-and-trade system will have to become more stringent and make significant changes to the program. And there will be changes to the inventory through 2025 to 2030 that we're looking at what kinds of allowances, what that inventory adjustments will look like, changes to possibly market design, question marks about how carbon dioxide removal, CCS, will be recognized, addressed in the system. So that rulemaking will be launching over the coming weeks and take us to the end of next year. We have the Washington State program that launched last year. It is still Washington State only, has not yet linked to California and Quebec, but as of a couple of weeks ago, there is an official statement saying that they are working closely with California and Quebec on a process to link this program. But importantly, with Washington State, you have political challenges, for lack of a better word, right? And there is a major threat to the system. It's called a ballot initiative, that if it votes yes on the ballot initiative in November, it would wipe out the new Cap and Invest program in Washington. And I think everybody, including business, is taking it very seriously. And I want to just take this moment to say, as of yesterday, there's a Vote No on the Good Side campaign that was just launched in Washington State to rally support to make sure that the population in Washington State vote no on this campaign to save the Cap and Invest system come November ballot. So that's a big thing that we're watching on the Washington State. It's a newer, brand new program, so we want to make sure it sticks. And my final thing, and I can have more in the discussion, but in this, certainly in the North America context, politics matter. We're at the mercy, these markets are at the mercy of politics, so the elections matter. And like many places in the world, we are staring down the barrel of some major elections that could have impacts on the existing programs or soon-to-be programs in the US and Canada. And so leaning into the information in this report, the importance and the benefits of these markets, just not on climate change, but also on affordability, on how revenue is used, and other co-benefit impacts is absolutely critical. And so with AIDA, our businesses, we're trying to amplify these messages to make sure these markets stick, that they do their job, and we reach these net zero targets in a good way.
Thanks a lot, Katie, for bringing us the freshest news. I would like now I think it's time to delve into the Turkish example. Hussein, could you tell us a bit more about the main themes of the Turkish carbon market? Also make us understand how it's different for instance, from the EU ETS, and what have been the key issues that have defined the past years?
I have a presentation about it.
Sure, please take.
I want to state greet everyone with my respect, and I'm pleased to be here. I want to give you some information about what we do to create ETS in Turkey last year. First of all, I want to state our goals about to create an ETS. First one is to achieve net zero emissions at 2053, and second one is adapting to CBAM without ignoring special conditions of our economy. We have a MRV system. This system are following 750 facilities from 15 different sectors. But we will take in only 133 facilities because we have thresholds. The important thresholds is emissions will be over 500,000 tons carbon dioxide equivalent, and we will take companies only two sectors, electric and industry sectors, and emissions of these 133 companies is 90% of total emissions of MRV and 52% of total emissions of Turkey. And I want to give you some information about planned implementation schedule. I have to, by the way, I have to say that the things which I'm telling you now are our suggestion to policymakers, our policymakers. They need to be accepted by our policymakers. We believe they will accept this regulation, maybe with some change. We plan October of this year the allocation distribution plan of the Carbon Market Board will be published in the official gazette. This plan will show us which company will how many allocations, and beginning of 2025 our pilot phase will start, and we will provide some facilities to companies that are in system. One of these facilities is free allocations at high level, maybe 100%. Another one is voluntary participation. We will take in companies that want to be in ETS. We will chance to be in the system, especially companies which will be affected by the CBAM, and we will apply sanctions at low level, maybe 20% of normal level, and our pilot phase will continue for 2 years. Then, beginning of 2027, our first implementation phase will start until 2034, and everything will be normal in this phase, and we want to create a suitable ETS and take take required level carbon price in this phase and reduction the emissions and to achieve our targets. And I want to give you some information about PMI project. PMI project is support us to implement ETS. It has a lot of components. The important one is determining of emissions trading system design element. With this project, we will determine emissions cap, scope, allocations, distribution, etc. Every tools of system, and we will make a study, conduct a study of economic modeling. This study will show us impact of carbon pricing on our stakeholders, private sectors, and general economy. And we can see with this project socio-economic impact of ETS in Turkey. In other words, just transition policies. And we want to create a benchmark for our ETS with this project. We are using grandparenting method for which company will take how many allocations, determining this. But we want to create benchmarks to adapt to EU ETS and for strongly reduction emissions. And other components of project is creating a registration system and establishing a sub-legislative baseline. And last thing I want to say about the climate law. Climate law will be accepted our policy makers. We believe with maybe some changes. It will provide us legislation baseline for successing green development, contributing to solving the climate change crisis in the world and achieving net zero emissions target at 2053. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Hussein. That was very, very interesting. Doesn't happen every day to hear so much about the Turkish, what's happening in Turkey. So really, really great to hear you. And now maybe we can talk about a slightly more, I would say, present in the media market, which is the UK one. It's the closest geographically to Europe, also the closest in terms of the sophistication of how the market works. And so, Eric, I would be very happy if you could tell us about the latest developments. And I mean, obviously, there is a lot of talk also about the price divergence with the ETS. And I would be happy to hear your views about that and also the prospect of a future link to the ETS. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a presentation that I'll just speak to, but then happy to answer those questions and other questions from the room. So thank you all for coming today, and I'd just like to also echo my congratulations to Lewis and the ICAP team for another excellent report that's, at least for ourselves in the UK, is like an invaluable resource to keep track and have a snapshot of emissions trading globally. So thank you and congratulations. I'm speaking about the UK's experience with the UK ETS. So the UK has had a long history in emissions trading. So we first launched voluntary pilot UK ETS over 20 years ago, back in 2002, and we're under the EU ETS between 2005 and 2020. The UK ETS itself is relatively new as a scheme, so it was launched in January 2021, and it's been running for a few years now. And we think it's been operating well. It's got an effective functioning market, and compliance rates are good. And just for your sort of background, if the UK ETS is completely new to you, it covers around 25% of our UK territorial emissions, and it's covering the power sector, energy-intensive industry, and also some aviation emissions, so domestic aviation in the UK, and also our flights from the UK to the European Economic Area and Gibraltar. So, as I say, the scheme's been running for a few years, and now our focus has turned more on looking to develop and improve the scheme. With the UK ETS, we're continually looking to try and review and improve it, trying to make sure that it's delivering as expected, that we're looking for opportunities to improve the scheme, and also to make sure it's updated to reflect wider changed circumstances. So back in summer 2022, we launched a comprehensive consultation to reach out to various stakeholders to the scheme to get their views and feedback on a broad range of policy proposals on how we wanted to reform and develop it further. And back last summer in 2023, we published our response, setting out a broad range of reforms that we're making to the scheme. And just before I sort of summarize some of the key things we've done over the last year, just to say that net zero absolutely sits at the heart of what we're trying to do with the UK ETS. So one of the major reforms we set out was aligning the UK ETS cap with our net zero target. So that will see a 30% drop in available allowances over the current phase. So that's between 2021 and 2030. And that's absolutely crucial that we sort of align our cap with the net zero target if we want it to be an effective tool to deliver our targets. In addition to that, we smoothed the transition to that net zero cap by releasing some allowances from reserve pots to auction between 2024 and 2027. So these are existing allowances under the existing cap, and they haven't been injected in from elsewhere. And the idea of that is to try and ensure that there is a smooth, predictable trajectory for businesses in the UK ETS, and that they didn't face a sharp drop in allowances from 2024 this year. In terms of free allocation for stationary installations, we've reduced the overall amount of available allowances that are given away for free, known as the industry cap, to make sure it's proportionate with the new net zero aligned cap. On aviation free allocation, we announced that we're going to phase that out based on independent research that there's minimal carbon leakage risk for that industry. But that change will only happen in 2026. So we're giving business time to adapt to that change and prepare for that change. In terms of the scope of the scheme, we announced that we're going to expand to a couple of new sectors. So we'll be expanding to domestic maritime in 2026, and also to energy from waste and waste incineration in 2028. We also set out our long-term intention to include engineered greenhouse gas removals in the UK ETS, and that will be subject to further consultations, policy development, and having a robust emissions monitoring, reporting, and verification system in place. So I've set out what we did in terms of July, back in the summer last year. In December, we also made a series of announcements about some future changes to the scheme. So we set out a couple of consultations for views from stakeholders on markets and free allocation policies. So, for example, on the market side, this was getting views from our stakeholders in terms of what policy options we could try and take to mitigate potential risks to the effective functioning of the market. And on the free allocation side, getting views from stakeholders in terms of how best we can account for emissions, activity, for benchmarking and carbon leakage risk from 2026 onwards. At that same month, we also announced our intention to launch a UK carbon border adjustment mechanism from January 2027 for certain carbon-intensive goods. We launched a consultation in March to get views from stakeholders on how we can design that UK CBAM, and that consultation is still open at the moment. It will close in June. Also beyond that, we have set out a long-term pathway for the UK ETS, which is confirming our commitment to keep maintaining the UK ETS until at least 2050. And in parallel with all these announcements I've made, we've also commissioned an independent review of the scheme to get some evaluations on the overall effectiveness. So it's a relatively short time it's been running, maybe not enough time yet to sort of see how effective it's been, but we're getting that sort of independent insight over the next few years, which will help inform our future development of the scheme. So as you've seen there summarised, a lot of changes, a lot of different announcements we've made, showing our sort of ambition to develop the scheme further. But, net zero, as I say, is at the centre of what we're doing, always looking to continually improve the scheme, but we're still learning as we're going. Emissions trading is an innovative area, and we've got much to learn from lots of other jurisdictions around the world who are taking different approaches to maintaining and designing their emissions trading schemes. So that's why assets like ICAP's status report are really, really helpful to ourselves in the UK and other jurisdictions to really understand all those different approaches that different jurisdictions and countries take. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Oh, please. So I might have other questions for you all, but I'm really aware of the time, and I would like to give the audience the possibility to ask some questions. So what about if I take a couple of questions? I already see one there. Yeah, the girl.
Thank you. Marie-Christine Johannes from Shell. I do have a question for Mr. Hussein Assas. I was just wondering, thank you so much, first of all, for your presentation. It's really insightful to understand a bit more what Turkey is looking at in terms of the ETS. Is it the intent to kind of set up in such a way that you will link with the EU ETS?
I can't hear you.
Is it your intention to link with the EU ETS? That's my question for you. And then for Luis, I was wondering whether you see the EU CBAM also accelerating the carbon pricing momentum around the world, because at least from the EU Commission perspective, I think that's how they view it. And also, given that the EU is launching the EU task force to help build capacity around ETS, what you think would be a helpful contribution from their side with that task force? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. Linking with EU ETS is not our priority issue for now. We want to create an ETS which will work well functioning, and we want to reduction our emissions, and we want to achieve our target about net zero emissions at over time. After achieve these targets, maybe our policymakers consider about linking with EU at or another ETS. Thank you.
Thanks, Hussein. And thanks for the question. So taking, first coming to the CBAM question, whether or not the CBAM is encouraging more countries to adopt schemes. I mean, I think in general, ETS has a very long development phase. So the schemes that are now getting close to implementation have been under consideration for oftentimes years, right? So it's very difficult to kind of tie CBAM announcement to the current trend that we're seeing in schemes being developed. I think in general, I'd like to think the focus for those countries that are developing schemes is on their NDCs and trying to reduce emissions. But of course, it's not a simple picture, and so I think things like CBAM will also encourage more countries to adopt trading schemes as they consider how to deal with the obligations that they place on them. So I mean, that's to say it's part of a picture, but it's not the full picture. When it comes to the task force, I think what we see at ICAP is that there is real value in linking up jurisdictions and getting them to talk technical people to technical people and policymakers to policymakers on how these schemes work, because they are really complex and they are really difficult to implement, and none are exactly the same. So I think there is always more work to do in that space of making sure that new schemes are able to learn lessons from schemes which have been operating for a while. I think always the schemes will reflect national circumstances. Countries are different. But yeah, I think that's where I see the real kind of gold, the real value in things like what the task force can do. Thanks.
Okay. Katie, did you want to chip in?
Well, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to, first of all, the session after this at 10:10 in the morning is our CBAM plenary. And I think while we were on stage, IETA, 3 major reports were released at this summit. The first day, it was the VCM guidance, high integrity guidance. Yesterday, it was a compendium of geostorage and crediting methodologies, so CCS CDR. Today, while we've been on stage, it's been our CBAM report. So it was just launched, and it is about a dozen or so country reactions, like a synthesis of dozen country reactions to CBAM. So I encourage everybody to take a peek at that. Turkey's included, as you can imagine, but a number of others, including China and India and parts of North Africa. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware. Thanks.
That's a great heads up. Thank you so much. I think we unfortunately don't have time anymore, but I really personally enjoyed this conversation. It was very insightful. And so I ask you to kindly share a last round of applause for our panelists.